So welcome to part 3 of my presentation where I'm taking you through data analysis that I've done over the last approximately 1 month for Wake County metrics. This particular part of the presentation is going to cover Math 1 metrics used by Wake County Public School System, and I hope you'll enjoy it because it's got a lot of interesting data in it. As I've said before, I try to cite my sources in all my charts. Also, I've done a lot of calculations, done a lot of manual manipulations to try to, to gather and digest the data from the North Carolina DPI and put that in a presentable form for your enjoyment. So some of the charts that we've seen in the last year related to Math 1 kind of started from this Student Achievement Committee in November 2018. At that meeting, this chart was shown, and the data on this chart has been used quite frequently since then. I'll talk about that more at a later time. Then in September of this year, 2019, we saw at the Board of Education meeting another update on some data for the school system overall at this testing and accountability overview. At that meeting, we saw this chart that showed Math 1 proficiency going back all the way to 2013 up to the most recent school year, 2019. Then we saw this chart also showing proficiency, and this breaks it down by grade span. It shows some middle school scores and high school scores. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to start with those three charts and really try to break those down, explain what is on these charts, where did this data come from, and how does it match or not match to what is publicly available from the North Carolina DPI. In a lot of cases, or I'd say in most cases, the numbers that we see on these charts are not at the DPI, and I'll talk about that as we go through this. We will also see on these charts is some of their deficiencies, in my opinion. I think that in each of these three cases, these charts, or at least the sets of charts in which these charts were contained, could have contained more context or more information that gave a more full picture of what is actually going on. So for example, this first chart here, this came out in November of 2018. This chart does not tell the scope of what this data is for. It doesn't tell you which students are represented in this data. It turns out that's very important, as we will see later. It does not show trend context. It only shows, basically 1 year to the next. So it's basically one data point showing a change from 1 year to the next. Doesn't show the prior years, so you can see if that was a trend that was normal or not. Doesn't show any context with the state or any other districts. And it doesn't show any subgroups. Now, obviously, you can't put all of those things on every chart. But again, this chart really just shows these two data points for this 1 year and doesn't really tell you what it's all about. This chart at the bottom that we saw just this past September, it does show a 7-year trend context, which is great. It shows context with these other subjects, which is also good, but it only shows GLP. And again, I'm not saying you have to put GLP and CCR on the same chart, but where's the CCR chart? It's not in the deck that this chart was in. So you only are getting the GLP view, which is grade level proficiency. You're not getting the college and career readiness. And again, there's no state context for this chart either. And there's no subgroups. In this next chart over here, you're getting a 2-year trend showing some 2018 and 19 data. It's showing a breakout by middle school and high school. So that's good. That gives you some comparison there. It's not giving any state context and not giving any subgroups. And again, it's only showing GLP, no CCR. And again, I'm comparing this chart with the other ones that are in the same deck, and the CCR data is not in the entire deck. We're only looking at GLP apparently in this presentation that was given in September at the Board of Education. In both of these charts, there are a few notes. This one shows some distribution of the Math 1 test takers, middle school versus high school. That's good. This one over here also has some notes related to the fact that this group does not include bank scores, and also that there's a new Math 1 test introduced, and we'll talk about that more later as well. So let's dig into each of these charts separately and carefully. So this first one is what I would call dataset V1, version 1 from November 2018. This is a chart that was published by Wake County Public School System in the SAC meeting, as I said. It shows GLP and CCR gains between the school year ending in 2017 and the school year ending in 2018. So that is year one of MVP in Wake County. As I noted, it is internally calculated by Wake County Public School System. It was tweeted by MVP in November 2018. It's been quoted verbally and in emails to parents complaining about MVP on many, many occasions. It was cited in the FAQ provided to Green Hope. It was cited in the response to 16 parents whose MVP complaints were denied. They were cited indirectly by the News and Observer, repeating WCPSS success claims, and these numbers have possibly been seen by other North Carolina counties choosing MVP. Eventually, after I submitted a public records request, Dr. Tillery provided a 2-year context to this data. Eventually, the tweet that I mentioned before was removed by MVP. That was around April timeframe. Despite the many, many uses of the numbers on this chart, either directly or indirectly, since November 2018, this chart was not updated or referenced explicitly in the September 2019 accountability update, except that these 2018 and 19 GLP numbers were given on a separate chart on page 15. So those numbers right here on this chart were essentially the follow-ons to the set of numbers that made up this chart, which again, we're going to get to that. But you would have never known that and made that connection by just watching that presentation in September at the Board of Education meeting. So one other thing to note about this data set is this scope really was for high school only, and it did not include bank scores. So again, not labeled on the chart. This was for high school only and no bank scores. So let's talk about this next data set. This one is one I called V2, version 2. This came out September 2019. And even though it was not labeled on the chart, I have determined that this chart is about middle school and high school students and does not include bank scores. It was presented at the September Board of Education meeting. It only shows GLP. It does show a long trend for 7 years, and these numbers are internally calculated by Wake County. And additionally, to my knowledge, this has not been quoted by MVP or Wake County Public School System about MVP success. So in other words, even the data back from 2017 and 18 were not quoted or included in any of the success communications about the year one of MVP. So my question that I had is, in November 2018, why was this data not used instead of the V1 data? Because again, the V1 data is high school only. This data set is high school and middle schools. Why not use the data set that is more comprehensive of all Math 1 students, which would have been this data set? You can draw your own conclusions, but I wonder if because these numbers were flat, say 66 to 66 from 17 to 18, maybe that was not a compelling story, whereas this was a little bit more compelling. Again, just a hypothesis. An alternative hypothesis is that the year one of MVP was really only implemented at the high school level and not at both high school and middle school levels, as parents have been told repeatedly. So now let's move over to this third graph. As I noted, these numbers on the right for high school, these are actually a part of the V1 data set because they essentially reflect high school scores in the last 2 years, 2018 and 2019. And then this set of data here is just showing middle schools, which from what I can tell, looks like it is coming directly from the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, because there are metrics in 2018 and 19 which cover middle school students. So I'm going to assume that's coming from NCDPI as the numbers are pretty close to matching up. Okay, so if you watched part 2 of this series, you will hopefully recognize this chart here. That is where I was trying to explain the evolution and kind of the usage of the different Math 1 EOC metrics as they've evolved over the last 4 years. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to show those 2 data sets that I just talked about on the prior page, version 1 and version 2, and showing you how those map to that chart. For example, V2 scope, that's middle school and high schools. That's showing just these middle schoolers and just the high schoolers. Those are coming together to make up this metric. All the banked scores from all these students who did their test in previous years are not included in these numbers. And then for V1, this is high school only, no bank scores. So again, that's just these students that take the Math 1 EOC in high school, no bank scores. After going through this and getting to this point, I can understand sort of the desire to get a clean, current year only picture of what Math 1 EOCs look like over the last several years, especially as we've changed the curriculum. It's not an unreasonable goal to want to do that. But the problem is when there's no context provided with the state and we don't have subgroup detail or any school level detail analysis that we could do, and then we've got different data versions used from one year to the next, the consumers who look at these charts and hear from the school system are uninformed, and they're confused, and I would include myself in that. I like to understand the data, and when I can't connect the dots with the data that's shown, and I can't dig underneath the covers and understand details, then I'm confused and frankly a little skeptical, because I am a critical thinker about data. If this is how I feel as a parent or a citizen in this county, how does the Board of Education or Wake County staff, how can they truly make informed, data-driven decisions when the analysis of these results is done at such a high surface level, is the way I look at it. So that's my question and my struggle here. And that's why I've spent so much time trying to get under the covers of these numbers. So don't panic when you see this chart. I know it looks very confusing, but I hope to dispel your confusion here very soon. So here's what I'm trying to explain on this chart. I'm trying to show how the Wake County metrics, which are internally calculated, and the North Carolina DPI metrics related to Math 1 that are, again, come from the state, how do they compare, and where do they overlap? So what the chart is showing you is any number that's in this sort of burgundy color is a GLP, a grade level proficiency number, that's publicly available from the NCDPI. And any number that's in blue is a GLP number provided by Wake County based on their internal calculations. Also, you may see MS and HS, that means middle school or high school. So let's start at the top. Back on the previous presentation, part 2, I talked about the evolution of the Math 1 metrics and how it was recorded at the DPI. So if we look back at 2016, we had the North Carolina DPI and, of course, Math 1 metric that was you can read in the spreadsheets from DPI, and what you saw there is middle school and high school Math 1 EOCs in the current year, plus bank scores from prior middle school test takers for 9th grade. So whenever you saw the numbers for 2016 and 17, this again for Wake County, we saw a 72 and a 74 in that data set. Then in 2018, that metric sort of broke into two parts. There was this M1 SEP part and the M1 part. So this M1 SEP was for middle school, the other one, M1, was for high school. So the numbers we saw there were for the M1 SEP, which again, middle school students taking Math 1, the GLP was greater than 95 for 2018. And then for 2019, it was 94. So in other words, these middle schoolers are doing really good in Math 1 because they are the advanced students that are taking Math 1 in 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. High schoolers, on the other hand, now we're breaking out their scores. Starting in 2018, we're seeing their score broken out into M1. And in 2018, their GLP proficiency was 65. Now, again, this number contains bank scores to 9th grade. So this is the last year that any scores for middle schoolers were banked or carried over into a 9th grade score. And then in 2019, that number dropped considerably down to 35. So again, there's no bank scores in this 35 number. But this is really, I would consider, a pure high school reflection in 2019 of how the Math 1 EOC went for high school students. So now let's look at the Wake County two versions that they have. Again, these are the Wake County internally calculated numbers. Let's look at the middle school and high school combination number. This is the V2 number from the chart that showed the 7 years of history. You saw the 63s on there, 63, 66, 66, and then back to 63. That's the trend on GLP for those numbers for that data set. And again, that data set excludes any bank scores. So it is a pure high school, middle school reflection of how those students did in each of these 4 years. Now let's go down to the V1 data set. So this again is the golden data set that started the history of Math 1 in Wake County for the last couple of years. So this one, based on the public records request that I did, I was able to get a report that showed the prior couple of years. And so we see a 35.9 in 16, a 40.5, and then a 42. And this is just from the excerpt from that email. So here the 40.5 to the 42, that is 1.5 difference. And that is what makes up the 1.5 on this graph. Again, this is GLP only. This whole chart is GLP, grade level for proficiency. So here we are, 2018, we're at 42. And then now we have the Wake County version 1 of that number is a 35. Okay, so recognize the 35. That is the same number that came from the NCDPI as the Math 1 score. So in other words, the North Carolina DPI has changed their definition of how they are reporting Math 1 proficiency. They have changed it to where it now happens to match the Wake County definition that they've been manually calculating for the last 4 years. So I see that as a good thing because we're converging. North Carolina is converging towards the method of tracking that Wake County's been trying to use for the last several years. And then likewise, the other numbers on this chart are the middle school numbers, and those appear to be coming directly from M1 SEP. Okay, so there again we have some as-is numbers right out of the DPI. So for these three numbers, the two middle school numbers, the greater than 95 for 2018 and the 94 for 2019, those match what's in the DPI, okay, on this Wake County produced chart. And then this 35 matches what's in the DPI as the M1 number. And this first number here, again, is a 2018 number. It's showing the prior year, which was the 42, which was, again, manually calculated, not available from DPI, but produced on this public records information here. So back to the large size of this chart. So again, this data is the version 2 middle and high school data. It's a Wake County calculation. The year 1 of MVP was flat for this particular data set. And for 2019 only, the Wake County calculation is also based on NCDPI's M1 calculation and M1 SEP. Additionally, I submitted a public records request for a Wake County calculated version of the CCR data for this set of students. And I got that public request back just a couple of days ago. So here's the run, or here's the 7 years of CCR data for the group of students that I'm calling V2, which is the middle school and high school students. And then again, notice there's a note here, new test and new achievement level structure introduced for 2018 and 19. So this is not a pretty chart, but I did want to at least put the CCR graph, trying to use the same colors. I put it on the same chart just to show what that looks like compared to the GLP data. And again, notice the comment, we got a new Math 1 test introduced. I think I've already mentioned that before. And on this chart, we have a couple of data sets for middle school. That's coming from the NCDPI M1 SEP metric, which is just middle schoolers. And then we have for the other numbers for high school, that is the V1 data set that Wake County calculated up until 2019. And now we're able to get that from the North Carolina M1 metric. And again, this is the V1 data, and that is a WCPSS calculation. So having access to the 2019 data and knowing how it connects to the original Math 1 success chart, we can now update that chart and show a 2019 version of that data. And so what we're showing here is the original chart from 2018. This is the email excerpt, which shows the fact that that data reflects only high school students, shows the history before that, and then now we've got the new data for 2019, which I've plotted on this chart, which shows a considerable drop in 2019 in GLP and CCR for this data set of students, which again is high school students. And I did get asked Wake County to confirm these numbers, and Brad McMillan did confirm these are the correct numbers. So if you're like me, you're looking at this and you're thinking, wow, that is just incredible. What a terrible decline that was coming into 2019. These numbers have just taken a nosedive, and they have. It is the reality. But guess what? If you recall all the little footnotes that we were seeing along the way that said there's a new Math 1 test, and there's a new test, a new achievement structure introduced. I got that clarified. I sent an email to the state, to Maxie Moore, and she wrote back and gave me this letter, which basically said you can ignore any of these test scores for 2019 for Math 1. Why? Because there's new standards. There's new standards for Math 1, and the new test aligned to the new standards. And because of that, the standards have driven changes into the test, and you can't compare the test of Math 1 from 2018, which is edition 4, to the one that was administered entered last year, which is edition 5. So does that mean that all the data that I just spent all this time trying to understand and learn and figure out is now invalid and it doesn't mean anything? I'm not so sure I buy that completely. And here's why. I say we should be very careful in disregarding the 2019 Math 1 scores. The reason for that is that we have a brand new curriculum which matches the North Carolina standards. That point has been made abundantly clear time after time. At the Green Hope High School MVP Math Night in February, we were told that MVP closely aligns to North Carolina standards. In the FAQ provided to Green Hope parents, the questions were asked, does MVP meet all the state standards? Tonight we were told that it meets the state standard. And the response, district staff has organized the MVP materials to ensure that they are aligned to the NC standards. Additionally, we have the Curriculum Review Committee responses to parent complaints that came out in June. In that report, we are given quote after quote, which tells us how MVP aligns to NC standards. Let's just read a few of them here. The MVP lesson plans illustrate how the students will acquire sufficient knowledge of fundamental mathematics as it aligns to the NC standards. The Math MVP curriculum is aligned with the standards and mathematical practices. In general, MVP materials appear to be written to the standards for the course. The instructional materials reviewed for the MVP series meet the expectation that the materials attended to the full intent of the mathematical content contained in the high school standards for all students. Based on the evidence provided, tasks and units for MVP were aligned to NC standards. Summary of units by course that notes changes to tasks suggests that curriculum materials have been adjusted to ensure alignment to state standards. One of the benefits to MVP is that it is aligned to the standards in a meaningful way. Tasks that involve modeling include a graphic of the modeling process in the teacher notes. Additionally, all the modeling standards are addressed in the materials. WCPSS practiced its due diligence to follow the policies established by our state and ensure that supplemental materials were included to address missing standards in MVP and eliminate MVP materials that did not match the NC mandates. In June 2016, the NC State Board of Education adopted revised standards for Math 1, 2, and 3. This effort was driven by input from educators, parents, guardians, community members, and mathematics experts at the university level. Essentially, the CCSSM was revised slightly and a few standards moved between courses. Because of this, it seemed logical that WCPSS worked with the MVP to modify the curriculum to account for the changes in standards in NC. While no curriculum is 100% aligned, it's common practice across the county and in NC for districts to modify when and where necessary. WCPSS also has adjusted certain MVP modules to assure that they align with the North Carolina standards. Additionally, all NC state standards seem to be present and accounted for after inventory of scope and sequences. Violation 4 indicates the use of MVP materials and methodologies violates Section CE0, the materials provision of thoughtful supports and scaffolds to support all students in accessing the North Carolina standards. The MVP lessons supply scaffolds to support all students in accessing the standards and concepts. The MVP curriculum is based on the North Carolina math standards and 8 mathematical teaching practices. Teachers are accustomed to this practice and are qualified to use their professional knowledge and judgment. Working in teams with district-level mathematics supervisors to enact modifications is also common practice. In short, the changes in standards was the impetus for modification of the MVP modules, not shortcomings in the curriculum. The WCPSS decision to remove MVP modules is in accordance with aligning to the North Carolina standards. MVP provides a standards-aligned avenue to support teachers and students in achieving that. But wait, there's more. In the Curriculum Review Decision Appeal Response, which was a letter from the Board of Education Chair Jim Martin to one of our parents who had filed a complaint, we are given this response. With respect to the complaints regarding the process used and the scope of the reviews concerning the reviews of authenticity, the cost of the curriculum, and alignment to state standards, the board finds that the process used was also under discretionary authority of the superintendent and does not violate any law, rule, or policy. In addition to process, the content, the selection, quality, and alignment to state standards are a matter of curriculum which have been designed to the authority of the superintendent and did not violate any law, rule, or policy. You want more? Okay, here it is. There's a Carolina Parent article written in August about MVP in Wake County. In that article, Drew Cook, one of the Wake County school system leaders, is quoted talking about how the prior curriculum that we had was not aligned to North Carolina standards. Then Michelle Tucker says, we ensured that students were going to have a viable curriculum that aligned to the North Carolina state standards, which over the course of time we're also changing and adapting. Janet Sartorius, who is an MVP employee, she says MVP works as a single cohesive curriculum aligned with high academic standards that allows for better differentiation of instruction for students. Additionally, districts are finding the MVP math is rigorous and aligned with high standards, she says. But that's not all. We even have something from this month. These are 2 different emails, actually 2 of the same emails, sent to 2 different parents from District 9 Board of Education Rep Bill Fletcher. He served on the board pretty much since 1993, with the exception of 2005 to 2013. We thank him for his service, but here's what he says in his emails. Again, talking about the old curriculum, pre-MVP. What was being taught was not consistent with state math standards. The district would be derelict in its duties if it allowed the old math practices to persist. But here, hang in there with us as we deliver math instruction based on the NC standards and challenge students to become critical thinkers and problem solvers. So what do you do with this? In 2017, Wake County selected a new curriculum for math which specifically matched and/or was tailored to match North Carolina standards. The selection and vetting process assured this. The parent session and the FAQ confirmed it. The curriculum review committee double confirmed it multiple times by multiple reviewers that were on that committee. And subsequent official WCPS communications triple confirmed it. We have nothing but repeated confirmation that MVP, our Math 1 curriculum, has matched the North Carolina standards. Therefore, to use the idea that a standards change, which again we knew about for the last 3 or 4 years, as a footnote to explain 2019 math performance, that's something that might work better for other districts than for Wake County, because Wake County was arguably one of the most prepared districts in the state for these new standards. So regardless of what the impact of this new test was to the metrics for Math 1 for 2019, I think we can still get a meaningful analysis by comparing the 2019 numbers or any other numbers for other years by comparing it to other groups or districts, or by using a ratio to a control group like the overall state metrics. That's the only way we can really know if Wake County is experiencing something different than the rest of the state is. Even if the as-is DPI metrics are not ideal for year-to-year comparisons, the fact is that the rules that apply to the state and other groups and other districts also apply to Wake County public school systems. Therefore, regardless of how the Math 1 business rules and tests evolve over time, comparing to others is a useful way to assess year-to-year progress in order to detect impacts or benefits of local changes. So back to my soapbox about context. So because this chart, this original chart here from November 2018, because this chart has no context, this chart that's updating it for 2019, it also doesn't have any context. And the context that we need is a comparison to other districts, other groups, or the state itself. So let me give you an example of that. Just how bad is our 2019 M1 GLP metric? Again, this is a metric that measures Math 1 end of a course for high school students only. The data here is included for any district that has more than 500 test takers, so only pulled in the larger districts. If you're looking for Wake County, we're way down here on the bottom. We're about 11 or 12 spots from the bottom of this list of about 43 districts in total. One of the interesting data points that the DPI included in 2019 metrics is the number of days missed due to Hurricane Florence. So what you're going to see is a lot of these districts missed many days, 2 to 3, 4 weeks in some cases, missed that much school during the school year, and still outscored us considerably on this metric. Additionally, look at the EDS percentages. Again, EDS is economically disadvantaged. These are counties and districts that are considerably more poor than Wake County is. Look at the ones at the top. Just look at Carteret. They are at 72.2% proficient, which is more than twice our proficiency level. Yet they missed roughly 3 weeks due to the hurricane. Their EDS number is about the same as ours, a little bit more than ours, but still considerable difference in their score versus ours. So let's take a look at the CCR metric. So this is a similar situation, but I would argue it's even worse, because here's our CCR at 8.9. Look at Carteret, the highest one out of this list. Again, 38.5 is not that great either, but if we're all using the excuse of the test was harder this year, their number was 4 times what ours was. This just does not align with the perception that I've always held for Wake County. I've always believed that we are a county full of parents, many of whom have professional 2 career earner jobs in STEM fields, and our kids are top performing in the state. We should be competing at the top of any list related to academics in the state, not near the bottom like we are here. So let's put that on pause for a moment and come back to where we started this entire presentation in part 1, which is with this bar graph showing comparisons to the state for grade level proficiency for all these subjects. So what I want to do here is I want to explain the number that's on that chart for Math 1. So as we've talked through this entire presentation, Wake County has shown several different ways to look at the Math 1 metrics. I want to make sure we're clear on what this particular number is measuring. So this is a delta number, again, versus the state, showing how does Wake County compare to the state. On the chart was 8%. And the numbers that were being compared here are the blended Math 1 scores for middle school and high school together. I confirmed with NCDPI how this blending calculation is done. It's basically a proration based on the number of students that took M1 or that took Math 1 EOC that were in middle school and therefore came up in the M1 SEP metric, and then prorating that with the number of high school students that took the EOC, and those come out in the M1 metric. So it's just a simple proration. You put those together and divide by the total number of students, and then you get the number. So as I calculated it, I came up with a difference of 7. And actually, I traded notes with Brad, and he was able to show me the data he used. He had an earlier version of the data that gave a different number for the state as 55%, whereas I was calculating 56% for the state, and that's why he got an 8 and I got a 7. So that's okay. I'll accept that. And then additionally, we have the number, now that we got that report back, we have the CCR number as well. I'd calculated 38.4 on the public request data that I just got back a couple days ago. That came back as a 39.1. So I don't know what the difference is in the 0.7 difference in our two numbers, but they're pretty close. So the other thing interesting on this chart, if you really stare at it a while, this will tell you sort of the mixture of middle school and high school students that are taking the Math 1 EOC, or for each North Carolina, Wake County, and Chapel Hill. So you can see the percentage of students that are in each middle school and high school levels taking that test. These top rows here show the quantities, the number of students, and the percentages of each, and then here are the GLP and CCR scores below. So we're getting near the end here. So what we have here, hopefully you're seeing the same information I am, is that there's a convergence in metric definitions. The Wake County versions of the Math 1 data are attempting to show a clean year-to-year comparisons of performance by excluding the bank data. Talked about that extensively. We've got the original V1 high school view, and then starting in 2019, that was captured in the M1 metric. And then we've got the new blended view, V2 view, the middle school and high school together. And then starting in 2019, this is calculated using both the M1 and M1 SEP metrics. And then additionally, Wake County showed the M1 SEP metric as is separately. I, for one, am glad to see NCDPI standard metrics converging on Wake County's internal calculations, because those internal calculations have several limitations. First, they can't be verified by the public. Also, they can't be compared to the state or other districts. Additionally, they can't be drilled into for subgroup or school level details. And then also, as we've seen with this Math 1 2019 EOC change, they can't even be trended over time in their own context if that definition of whatever's being tested is changing. So the other problem is they may appear to be cherry-picked if the results in the context is lacking or the basis changes the following year. For example, if high school is only used for 2017-18 success claims, but then all of a sudden a blended middle school and high school view is introduced in 18 and 19, which was not as bad as the high school view was in 18 and 19, that leads to me thinking something may be cherry-picked. As such, I think internally calculated data sets are generally underinformative and beg more questions than answers. It's better to have imperfect, verifiable data with context than perfect, unverifiable data with no context. Who said that? I said that. So let me give an example of how that's going to work. So here are the three Math 1 metrics that we've talked quite a bit about. The M1 SEP, the M1, and then a blended prorated version of both of those together, and how each group did on these particular metrics. This is going to allow us to get a better understanding of the achievement gap at the different levels of the Math 1 EOC test. But I want you to see this now because I think you'll get a taste for how important it is to dig underneath the covers. We saw the blended number brought out this year as a combination of middle school and high school. But really, when you dig under the covers, you will see to what extent this middle school number makes that up. They're almost half the number of students, the total 6166 versus 6716, but quite a bit of them are AIG students. Compare that to high school, M1. You have almost 50-50 EDS, and then large majority not AIG. So in other words, if you take your strongest performing students and blend that together with this other group that maybe didn't perform as well, which you get as a result that the public doesn't really question. It looks okay. No, it doesn't really draw a lot of attention to it. So that's why I think it's important to be able to use metrics that can be compared to one another and dug into from a subgroup perspective, and to be able to compare trends and context over time. Well, hopefully that presentation was helpful. I know it's somewhat of a cliffhanger because really I think it is the next set of data that we're going to want to look into, because we've built the construct that will allow that to make more sense and be more useful. So I hope you're not more confused now than you were before. I've done my best to try to explain all this Math 1 craziness to myself and to you as well. So we've gone from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure to the Matrix. So we've advanced ourselves, hopefully some. And maybe we even get to the level of an Aristotle type of thinker. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for part 4 coming up hopefully in the next week. Hi, this video is a short addendum that will go with part 3. This is going to cover a couple of corrections I've discovered in the last couple of days, and I wanted to make sure I explain what those are. This short video is going to address corrections related to the data set V2 and the source that data originates from. So I'm just going to show the charts where the changes occurred. On this chart here, number 47, I identified this data set as being related directly to M1 SEP, but actually this is a Wake County calculation that is based on M1 SEP with a couple of tweaks. On this chart, I think this is a good one to explain the key difference. Everything here is still correct. The V2 scope is made up of middle school test takers of the Math 1 EOC and high school test takers of the Math 1 EOC. No bank scores are going into here. So the key mistake I made on the prior presentation is incorrectly saying that was M1 SEP, but reality, M1 SEP does include the bank scores of middle school test takers that are before 8th grade. So again, when middle schoolers take the Math 1 EOC now, starting in 2018, only in their 8th grade do those scores get added into M1 SEP. So the 6th graders and 7th graders, or 5th graders if there's such students, those scores would be banked and would not count in M1 SEP until they are unbanked when that student gets into 8th grade. So again, Wake County is including the middle school test takers, 6th, 7th, 8th, whatever grade they're in, into this metric over here. And then M1 SEP just picks those test results up once those students get to 8th grade. So the change to this chart is just going to be this little note at the bottom that this little data set here is based on the M1 SEP minus the bank scores plus the pre-8th grade scores. And then on this chart, I will call this whole data set a Wake County calculation. And then my note here for 2019, that's based on M1 and also M1 SEP minus banked plus pre-8th grade scores. Similar footnote on this chart and on this one as well. I added just that this is Wake County calculation. And then with that information, that solves a mystery because I was slightly off on my comparisons, my calculations of the blended score because I was just using M1 SEP and M1 together without alteration, whereas Wake County is taking the M1 SEP and then subtracting out the bank scores and adding in the pre-8th grade middle school scores. So the result of that is a slight variation, at least for 2019. They came up with we're pretty equivalent on the GLP, 63 and 63.1, but then on the CCR, I calculated 38.4, they calculated 39.1. So again, the main difference is the middle schoolers' Math 1 EOC scores are counted into the Wake County calculation during the year they are given the test, whereas the M1 SEP metric banks any of the pre-8th grade test scores and brings them into the M1 SEP metric in a future year when that student reaches the 8th grade. And then on this chart, everything here made a couple of changes here. On the blended calculation, this is calculated using M1 and again, M1 SEP minus bank plus pre-8th grade metrics. And then on this last note here, on this one part of this graph, I had said earlier that's the M1 SEP graph metric as is, but it's actually M1 SEP minus bank plus pre-8th grade scores. So pretty close, just still small nuance, but I wanted to at least set the record straight and at least cover this discrepancy.